People stand in line outside the Park Hotel on Nanjing Road. They are waiting for pastries from the bakery on the ground floor. The hotel opened in 1934. It has 22 floors and a dark tower that rises above the older buildings around Rimingguangchang. For almost 50 years, it was the tallest building in Shanghai. The man who designed it arrived in the city 16 years before it opened. His name was Ladislav Hudets. He was 25 years old. He had studied architecture in Budapest and served as an officer in the Austro-Hungarian army. In 1916, Russian troops captured him and sent him to a prison camp in Siberia. He got out, and he went east, because east was away from the war. He needed a city that would let him in. There was one. Since 1843, this port had not asked arrivals for documents. There was no passport control on the docks. You came down the gangway, and you were in the city. Hudek found work as a junior draftsman in an American architectural firm. 7 years later, he opened his own office. In 1933, he finished the Grand Theater on Nanjing Road. It is still a cinema. The next year, he completed the Park Hotel a few doors away. He designed more than 60 buildings in Shanghai. Around 40 are still standing. The wedge-shaped apartment block on Huaihai Road is the Normandy Apartments. The greenhouse on Tongren Road is his. So is the Moore Memorial Church near Rimingguangchang. Hudek left Shanghai in 1947 and never came back. He died in California 11 years later. The house he built for his family on Fenyu Road is now the Hudek Memorial Hall. The Park Hotel is still a hotel. The line outside is still for the bakery. 4 years after Hudek's arrived, ships began coming from the north. The Russian Civil War had ended. A fleet belonging to the losing side left Vladivostok and worked its way down the coast. Other ports turned the ships away. They eventually reached Shanghai. Over the next decade, roughly 20,000 Russians settled in the city. They arrived without a country. Most other foreign residents in Shanghai were protected by consulates and by treaties that placed them under foreign courts. The Russians no longer had a government that could protect them. They were stateless. Many had been officers, landowners, or professionals. In Shanghai, they took the work they could find. Men became bodyguards, drivers and doormen. Women worked as dance hostesses in hotel ballrooms. Many opened small businesses along Avenue Joffre in the French Concession. There were bakeries, tailors, bookshops, restaurants, and music schools. Avenue Joffre is Huaihai Road now. It is still one of Shanghai's main shopping streets. 2 Russian Orthodox churches remain nearby. St. Nicholas stands on Gaolan Road. The Cathedral of the Mother of God, with its pale blue dome, stands on Xinle Road. The Russians also left a soup. In Shanghai, it is called luo song tang. The name means Russian soup. In Russia, the soup had been made with beetroot and sour cream. Neither was easy to find in Shanghai, so local cooks used tomato, cabbage, cheap cuts of beef, and a little flour. That is still how many families make it. Children in Shanghai grow up eating it, and many never ask where it came from. In 1923, a Japanese writer came to Shanghai and moved into an apartment building full of Russians. His name was Shofu Muramatsu. He was 34 and had published several books in Japan without much success. He stayed in Shanghai for a little more than 2 months. He spent his evenings in tea houses, theaters, and gambling halls, and wrote down what he saw. The city was divided among 3 governments. The International Settlement had a foreign municipal council. The French Concession answered to French authorities. The Chinese city was governed by China. Each had its own police and courts. Crossing a street could mean entering a different jurisdiction. After Muramatsu returned to Japan, he wrote a book about the city. He needed a title and used 2 characters, Mo and Dul. Dul meant a great city or capital. Mo could suggest magic, but it could also mean a demon. Muramatsu used both senses. His Shanghai included theaters and bright shop windows. It also included opium, poverty, crime, and foreign rule. The book appeared in 1924. Its title was Mo Dul. The word was mostly forgotten. After 2000, people in China began using it online. It spread from internet forums into ordinary speech. Today, Mo Dul is one of Shanghai's best-known nicknames. It was coined by a visitor who stayed for a little over 60 days. Opium was one of the businesses Muramatsu had seen. It had already brought another family to Shanghai. In 1845, David Sassoon and Sons opened an office beside the Huangpu River. The family had left Baghdad and built a trading network from Bombay. It dealt in cotton, textiles, and opium, which was legal in the foreign settlements and extremely profitable. In 1931, Victor Sassoon moved to Shanghai himself. He was 50. He had served as a pilot during the First World War and had been injured in a crash. He walked with 2 canes for the rest of his life. Sassoon brought the family money with him. He bought apartment buildings, offices, hotels, and large areas of land. By most accounts, he became the largest private property owner in Shanghai. On the north bank of Suzhou Creek, he built the Embankment Building. A few years later, newly arrived refugees would be given rooms there. At the point where Nanjing Road meets Waitan, Sassoon built a headquarters with a hotel inside it. A green copper pyramid covered the roof. He kept an apartment at the top. For about 15 years, he was the richest man in Shanghai. Then the wars reached the city. By 1949, the government had changed, and Sassoon had left most of his wealth in Shanghai was tied up in land and buildings. None of it could leave with him. He spent his final years in the Bahamas and died in Nassau in 1961. The building with the green roof is the Peace Hotel. It is still open on the corner of Nanjing Road and Waitan. Anyone with a reservation can stay there. A short distance away, Suzhou Creek divided the foreign settlement from districts controlled by China. By the autumn of 1937, the Chinese army was losing Shanghai. After 3 months of fighting, most units were ordered to withdraw. A few hundred men were told to remain behind and hold a warehouse on the north bank of the creek. It was called the Sihang Warehouse. 4 banks had built it to store goods. It was 6 stories high, made of reinforced concrete, and stronger than most buildings nearby. Across the water was the international settlement. Foreign residents, reporters, and officials could stand on the other bank and watch. A conference was about to begin in Brussels. Countries that had signed treaties concerning China were going to discuss the war. Jiang Jieshi wanted the battle to remain visible while they met. The officer in charge of the warehouse was Xie Jinyuan. He had a little over 400 men. They told the press there were 800. The fighting continued for 4 days. People gathered on the opposite bank. Reporters sent the story abroad. At night, supplies and messages crossed the creek. Then the defenders were ordered to leave. A little over 400 had entered the warehouse. A little under 400 crossed into the international settlement. They were disarmed and confined there. The fighting had damaged much of Hongkou, north of the creek. Soon, people arriving from Europe began moving into the same streets. Jewish families were trying to leave Germany, Austria, and other parts of Europe. Most destinations required a visa, a sponsor, a quota number, or a place on a waiting list. The old rule still held. The port did not ask. Between 18,000 and 20,000 Jewish refugees reached the city. Many came by ship through the Suez Canal. Others crossed the Soviet Union by train. They arrived with what they could carry. Some were housed in the Embankment Building. Most settled in Hongkou, where rents were low and buildings damaged in 1937 were still available. Within a few years, the district had German bakeries, Viennese coffee houses, doctors, dentists, a newspaper, and a theater company. Joseon Road became known as Little Vienna. In 1939, Rudolf and Lily Mossberg opened a cafe called the White Horse Inn. Refugees went there to look for work, exchange news, and ask whether relatives had made it out. In 1943, the Japanese authorities ordered stateless refugees who had arrived after 1937 to move into an area of about 1 square mile. Around 20,000 people lived there until the war ended. They were hungry, they were crowded. Almost all of them survived. The Ohel Moishe Synagogue on Chongyang Road is now part of the Shanghai Jewish Refugees Museum. Beside it is a wall bearing 18,578 names. The war also changed something people ate. European restaurants in Shanghai served breaded pork cutlets with a dark sauce imported from England. When the shipping lanes closed, the bottles stopped arriving. A local factory made its own version. The cutlet is called Jiaju Pai. The sauce is still made by Taikang and sold under a yellow label. Both are now part of ordinary Shanghai cooking. 4 years after the war ended, another army entered the city. The general in command was Chen Yi. He was 48 and would serve as Shanghai's mayor for the next 9 years. Before the troops entered, Chen issued rules. Soldiers were not to enter private homes. They were not to take so much as a needle or a piece of thread. On the first nights, thousands of soldiers slept on the pavement of Nanjing Road. It rained. Residents came outside in the morning and found them lying in front of buildings they had just captured. One of the men who drove down to look was Rong Yiren. He was 33. His family owned flour mills, cotton mills, and other businesses across eastern China. Rong went with his brother. When he returned home, he said the nationalists were not coming back. Rong stayed in Shanghai. Many people in his position left. Most newcomers to Shanghai had never owned factories. Families from Subei in northern Jiangsu had been arriving for generations after floods and famine pushed them south. They worked on the docks and in the mills. Many built homes from scrap beside creeks or behind factories. In 1951, the new government began building a planned housing estate for workers in Putuo. It had running water, a clinic, a school, and shops. It was called Caoyang New Village. The first residents moved in the next year. There were about 100 families. All had been selected by their factories as model workers. Caoyang was presented to foreign visitors as a new kind of workers' housing. 70 years later, it is an old neighborhood. The trees have grown over the streets. The buildings are protected and cannot simply be knocked down. The same year, the first families entered Caoyang. A political campaign was directed at private business owners. Company accounts were opened, employees were questioned, owners attended meetings and were expected to confess to offenses. Targets were assigned, and the campaign continued for months. A number of businessmen killed themselves. Some jumped from office buildings along Waitan and in the center of Shanghai. The mayor was still Chen Yi. By several accounts, he called the people who jumped paratroopers. He would ask how many had come down that day. Today, a statue of Chen Yi stands at the north end of Waitan. The square is named after him. Rong Yiren survived the campaign. In 1956, when private companies were converted into joint state-private firms, he offered the family businesses early and encouraged other owners to do the same. In 1957, he became a deputy mayor of Shanghai. Newspapers called him the Red Capitalist. That year, the Shanghai Animation Film Studio opened at number 618, Wenhongdu Road. The artists looked for ideas in Chinese painting, paper cutting, shadow puppetry, and folk prints. American animation was the standard against which their work would be measured. They tried to make something different. In 1960, the studio released Little Tadpoles Look for Their Mother. Traditional ink painting spreads through wet paper. The edge of every brushstroke is soft, and no two strokes are exactly the same. Animation required the artist to reproduce an image frame after frame. The studio found a way to make the ink move on film. Its artists never fully explained how they did it. Then, they made Havoc in Heaven, with Sun Wukong as the Monkey King. His design drew on Peking opera masks and New Year prints. The film was sold to dozens of countries. Children in Europe watched it without necessarily knowing where it had been made. In 1966, during the Cultural Revolution, Rong was denounced, beaten, and sent away to work. After the Cultural Revolution, he returned to public life. In 1979, China was again looking for investment from outside the country. Rong was given the job of creating an institution to bring it in. It was called CITIC, the China International Trust and Investment Corporation. He founded it and ran it for a decade. In 1993, Rong became vice president of the People's Republic of China. He died in 2005 at the age of 89. By the time he became vice president, the opposite bank of the Huangpu had begun to change. For most of Shanghai's history, Pudong had been farmland, warehouses, low houses, and a shipyard. People took ferries across the river to work. A saying held that a bed on the western bank was worth more than a house in Pudong. In April 1990, the government announced that Pudong would be developed. Lujiazui, directly across from Waitan, was chosen as a financial district. That December, the Shanghai Stock Exchange reopened after 41 years. It did not open in a bank or a purpose-built exchange. Its first trading floor was the Peacock Hall, a ballroom in the old Astor House Hotel, because that was the room available. The first bank signed a lease in Lujiazui the following year. Construction began on the Oriental Pearl Television Tower, Jinmao Tower, the Shanghai World Financial Center, and Shanghai Tower came later. The Astor House is now the China Securities Museum. The Peacock Hall is still inside. In 2018, the rules changed again. Foreign car makers had usually been required to operate through joint ventures with Chinese partners. For electric vehicles, a foreign company could now own its factory outright. Tesla signed an agreement within months. It acquired the use of roughly 86 hectares at Lingong for 50 years. The contract specified how much the company would invest and how much tax it would pay. Construction began in January 2019. The first Model 3 cars built there were delivered before the year ended. It was the first wholly foreign-owned car factory in China. Many Shanghai streets are named after places elsewhere in China. There is a Beijing Road, a Guangdong Road, a Yunnan Road, and a Xizang Road. Many streets running in one direction are named after provinces. Streets crossing them are named after cities. Urumqi Road is named after Urumqi, about 4,000 kilometers away in the far northwest. Most people who live on the street have never been there. In November 2022, a fire in an apartment building in Urumqi killed 10 people. China had been under pandemic controls for almost 3 years, and Shanghai had spent 2 months of that spring under lockdown. A few days after the fire, people gathered on Urumqi Road. They left flowers and candles. Some held up blank sheets of paper. Police cleared the street and detained a number of people. Similar gatherings appeared in Beijing, Nanjing, Chengdu, and Wuhan. Within a month, the controls were lifted. Urumqi Road is an ordinary street today. It has plane trees, apartment blocks, a wet market, and cafes. Around 25 million people live in Shanghai. Roughly 10 million were born somewhere else. For many of them, there is a Shanghai residence permit. Attached to it is a point system. Education is worth points. Age is worth points. Professional qualifications are worth points. Each year of social insurance paid in Shanghai is worth points. There are calculators online. A person enters the details and sees the total. The number is 120. At 120 points, a child can become eligible to sit local school entrance examinations in Shanghai. In 1918, Ladislav Hudeks walked down a gangway carrying almost nothing. Nobody on the dock asked him for anything at all. Tonight, somewhere in Shanghai, someone is sitting in front of a screen adding up a number.